That night was absolute chaos. The storm had started in the middle of the afternoon, and the sound of the wind mixed with the rain hitting the windows made me feel like I was trapped inside a drum. I'd taken the day to catch up on some chores I'd been putting off for weeks, so I figured that would be my company as I folded laundry and swept the floors. I've been living alone in this quiet, out-of-the-way neighborhood for a while now, and it's rare to get visitors, especially on nights like that. So when I heard the knock on the door, I felt this strange shiver crawl up my spine, but I tried to brush it off, probably just a neighbor needing something. I opened the door, and there he was, soaked from head to toe, hair dripping water, his heavy jacket clinging to his body. He looked like he was in his 40s, his face partially hidden by the hood's shadows, but I could see he was shivering. He said his car broke down nearby and that he needed to use the phone. Something about his story felt off. There wasn't really a road close by. But who was I to judge, right? I forced a small smile and nodded, letting him in quickly so I could get this over with. I turned to grab the phone from the table in the living room, and that's when I heard the click of the door lock behind me. In that instant, my senses kicked into overdrive like a blaring alarm. For a second, I was frozen with my hand in midair, trying to process what just happened. There was no reason for him to lock the door, and the way he did it, so quietly and deliberately, made it clear this wasn't some innocent gesture. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and not show any fear. I turned slowly, trying to stay calm, and saw him standing there in the middle of the room, watching me with an unreadable expression. He didn't look uncomfortable anymore. In fact, he looked almost amused, which only made it all creepier. He looked me up and down, like he was sizing me up, and asked where the phone was. I pointed to the table, trying to avoid eye contact. My mind was racing, scrambling for an excuse, anything that would convince him to leave without him catching on to the fear on my face. But he didn't even make a move towards the table or the phone. Instead, he started walking around the room, his footsteps echoing on the wood floor, each one slower than the last, like he was examining his surroundings. I followed his movements from the corner of my eye, my hands starting to sweat, and it was then that I realized we were in some kind of silent standoff. As he wandered around, I started planning an escape in my head. My mind was working overtime, trying to calculate any possible exit without him realizing what I was up to. The door was locked, and he was between me and any easy way out. I glanced at the windows. They were locked too, with thick glass that would take way too long to open. The silence between us was suffocating, broken only by the storm outside, which seemed to have picked up like the world was closing off any chance for help. He, on the other hand, didn't seem rushed at all. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying my barely contained fear. Gradually, he started talking, telling a story completely different from what he said at the door. His tone was calm, almost casual, but every word sounded like a thinly veiled threat. He said he was just visiting town and that he had noticed the isolated and perfect house earlier in the day. I felt exposed, like my own home wasn't safe anymore. My stomach turned, and every part of me was screaming to get out, but I knew I had to act carefully. Each second felt like an eternity, and every word he spoke was a reminder of how trapped I was, completely vulnerable in my own living room. I tried to keep my voice steady, and asked again if he wanted to use the phone, hoping that maybe, somehow, he'd change his mind and leave. He just gave me this cold, lifeless smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No rush," he replied, shrugging like he was on a casual visit. By now, I couldn't hide my fear. I felt my hands shaking as I took a few steps back, trying to create some distance. But he noticed, and like it was a game, took a few steps toward me, closing the gap I was so desperately trying to keep. It turned into a sort of sinister dance, where every move I made was mirrored by him, like a silent predator enjoying my growing panic. My only chance was the hallway that led to the bedrooms, but I'd have to be quick enough that he wouldn't catch on. With my heart racing, I threw out, "I'll grab you a towel," using the first excuse that came to mind. He tilted his head, studying me like he was deciding if he should laugh at my poor attempt. But to my surprise, he just nodded, that unsettling smile still on his face. I took the chance and started walking toward the hallway, feeling his gaze burning into my back with every step. As soon as I turned down the hall, my pace quickened, and my only thought was to find somewhere safe to lock myself in until he left. I darted into the master bedroom, shut the door behind me, and turned the key with trembling hands. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the storm outside anymore. All my confidence crumbled as I realized just how trapped I was. I looked around, searching for anything I could use to defend myself, a chair, a lamp, anything, but nothing felt enough against someone who had clearly planned every step of what he was doing. Then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hallway. He was coming, unhurried, like he was savoring every second. I tried to steady my breathing, crouched behind the bed, clutching my phone and desperately trying to call for help. But, as if things couldn't get worse, I realized I had no signal. The storm must have knocked it out. A chill ran down my spine, and in that moment, all I could do was stay perfectly still, listening as his footsteps grew closer and closer to the door. The footsteps stopped right outside, and the silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than any sound. I stayed there, frozen, barely breathing, waiting for any clue of his next move. After a few seconds that felt like hours, I heard the handle turn slowly. I could only hope the door was really locked, but when the handle stopped, he started knocking, slow, rhythmic, almost mocking. Each knock felt like a reminder that I wasn't safe, that he was just outside, waiting for his chance. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst, trying to convince myself that if I stayed quiet enough, maybe he'd give up. To my surprise, after a few minutes, the sound stopped. I waited a bit longer, afraid it might be a trick, but the silence continued. Finally, I gathered the courage to get up and, with shaky legs, crept over to the window to see if he was gone. There was no one in the yard, and with a mix of relief and suspicion, I unlocked the bedroom door and dashed to the living room. The front door was slightly open, and the rain was still pouring outside. He was gone, no sign of him or any trace that he'd been there. I never found out who he was or what he wanted, but since that night, I lock my door as soon as it gets dark. It's just a habit now, a reminder that, as safe as a home can feel, danger can show up anytime, usually without any warning at all. Working the graveyard shift at a gas station was never really my dream job, but honestly, it was easy work that paid the bills. Most nights were spent sneaking in quick naps and gulping down coffee, with only the occasional interruption from a drunk needing more beer or a lost driver looking for directions. But a few months ago, a customer started showing up almost every night, always around the same time, between 3 and 4 in the morning. The guy was thin, in his 40s, with a scruffy beard and sunken eyes, always dressed in worn-out baggy clothes. At first I didn't think much of him, just another oddball wandering around late at night. But soon I started noticing something that made me uncomfortable. Every time he came, he bought items that wouldn't seem suspicious on their own, but together they felt way out of the ordinary. One night he bought a roll of duct tape, the next industrial-sized trash bags, then rope. I'd try to make small talk, ask things like, working on a project? Or going camping? He'd always respond with a quick nod, never meeting my eyes, like he was in a hurry or wanted to avoid any interaction. It started to really bug me, you know. I tried not to dwell on it, but every time he left, I'd feel this strange, lingering unease, like something was deeply wrong with the whole situation. One night, he came in looking different, more tense. His hands were shaking slightly, and he seemed a bit out of it, like he was in a rush but didn't quite know why he was there. He went straight to the tools section and grabbed one of those heavy-duty flashlights, the kind that can light up a whole mile if needed. When he came to the counter, I tried to make small talk again, asking something like, "What's the flashlight for? Late night fishing?" He just mumbled something I couldn't make out, didn't even look at me, and threw some crumpled bills on the counter, almost like he was desperate to get out of there. The way he acted left a knot in my stomach, a bad feeling I couldn't shake. As soon as he left, that uneasy feeling grew stronger. I knew it was probably none of my business, but I just couldn't ignore the sense that he was up to something strange. I grabbed my phone, and after hesitating a bit, decided to call the police station down the street. I quickly explained the situation, not going into too much detail, but enough for the officer on the line to take me seriously. He promised to send a patrol car to check things out in the area. I felt a bit guilty afterward, wondering if I was overreacting, but at the same time, something inside me said I'd done the right thing. It didn't take long for a patrol car to pull up nearby. I watched the two officers exchange a few quick words before heading off down the road in the direction the man had taken. I watched from the window, still feeling that nagging sense that something terrible was about to be uncovered. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back into the store, looking both surprised and disturbed. He told me they'd found the man's car parked in a secluded spot near an old trail that led into a dense wooded area. The car was a mess. He'd practically turned it into some kind of home. Inside the car, they found a bunch of the items he'd been buying from the gas station over the past few weeks: rope, garbage bags, duct tape. But what really sent chills down my spine was hearing about a grimy old mattress on the back seat, covered with torn blankets and food scraps scattered everywhere. The officer said it looked like he'd been living there for a while, but what nobody could understand was why. He wasn't just a regular homeless guy, they said. Apparently, he had money, but was choosing to live this way, accumulating these strange supplies. The officers tried talking to him, but he stayed vague, not offering much explanation. He only kept saying he was doing important work and that people wouldn't understand. That just made the whole thing even stranger. The officers tried to dig deeper, to see if he was involved in any crimes or had a history of mental health issues, but they didn't find anything relevant. No criminal record, no medical history indicating any problems. The best they could do was make him leave the area, telling him he couldn't stay there since it was private property. After he left, things cooled down a bit, and I tried to get back to my usual routine, but that uncomfortable feeling never really left me. Every late-night customer that came in after that, I'd look twice, half expecting to see him again. Time passed, and I started to think I'd never see the guy again. But a few weeks later, around the same time, close to 3 in the morning, he came back. This time, he looked even more worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. He walked in, took a quick look around, like he was searching for someone, and headed straight for the counter, buying only one thing: an extra battery for that flashlight he'd bought last time. When he got to the counter, I couldn't hold back my curiosity this time, so I asked more directly, trying to understand what was going on. "Are you working on some night job or something, man?" He stared at me for a moment, but his eyes looked empty, distant, like he was in another world. After a long, uncomfortable pause, he answered in a low voice, almost a whisper, "It's safer at night. Nobody sees me." That sent chills down my spine. He paid for the battery without another word and rushed out, like he was running from something or someone. I watched him leave until he disappeared into the dark road, more convinced than ever that he was up to something very strange. After that night, I never saw him again. A few days later, one of the officers stopped by on his patrol, and I found out they'd found his car abandoned in the same spot, but the man himself seemed to have vanished without a trace. There were no signs of violence or anything to suggest he'd planned to leave. Just his car, covered in dust, with all the items he'd accumulated still inside, untouched. Since then, every time I think back to those nights, I'm left with this bitter feeling that something truly sinister was happening right under my nose. Maybe I'll never know what was really going on with him, but one thing's for sure. The image of that man and his hollow, empty stare still haunts me to this day. It happened on one of those weekends I'd been looking forward to for weeks. My parents were going away, and I'd finally have the whole house to myself. I was around 17, and like any teenager, all I wanted was a little independence and, of course, to enjoy the silence. Back then, I loved spending hours in the basement. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was the only place where I really felt isolated from the rest of the world. I grabbed some blankets, went down with a few snacks, and started watching a movie on my laptop, just relaxing, enjoying the near-perfect silence. That was the plan, at least. Until I started hearing some weird noises upstairs. At first I thought it was all in my head. You know when you hear a noise and try to convince yourself it's just the house settling or something like that? Yeah, I tried to calm myself that way, but the sounds continued. It was like footsteps, soft, like someone was trying to walk without making a sound. I just sat there, frozen, listening intently. I even thought about ignoring it, but the discomfort was growing. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, trying to laugh it off, but he noticed something off in my voice. He chuckled and told me it was probably just the wind or something, and to relax. That helped a bit, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't go away. After that call, I forced myself to try and relax again. I started the movie back up, turned the volume up a bit to distract myself, but the idea of being alone in the whole house started to make me uneasy. I tried not to think too much about it, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then, late that night, just as the movie was ending, I heard the noise again. This time, it wasn't just a single footstep. There were several. I could swear someone was walking around upstairs. And then came the sound that made my heart race, the slow creak of a door closing. I mentally ran through the doors upstairs and knew that the only one that made that specific sound was the door to my bedroom. I was completely frozen. I tried to think, to convince myself it was impossible, but something in me knew this wasn't a mistake. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone again and dialed 911. The operator listened calmly, but my voice must have given away how scared I was. She asked me to stay where I was and said she'd send a squad car as soon as possible. The next few minutes felt like hours. I just stood there, still, with the phone in my hand, listening to every little noise, wondering if I'd see someone coming down the basement stairs any second. The sense of helplessness was terrifying. When I finally heard the police sirens approaching, it was like I could breathe again. The officers entered the house and went straight upstairs while I waited in the basement, still too afraid to move. After a while, one of the officers came down and told me the house seemed empty, but they wanted to ask me a few questions. I told them about the footsteps and the sound of the door closing, and they seemed to take it seriously. I asked one of them to check every room and only went upstairs when they assured me it was safe. It felt like an overreaction, but I didn't want to take any chances. As they inspected the house, I heard one of the officers call out to the others. My heart started racing again. When they came back, they called me over and said they'd found something strange. A small, nearly invisible entryway hidden behind a built-in closet in the upstairs hallway. When they opened the little door, the smell of mold and dust was strong, and inside there were signs that someone had been staying there recently. A folded blanket, some food wrappers, and even a few water bottles. The thought that someone had been living hidden in my house while I was there alone sent chills down my spine that I'll never forget. The police started asking more questions, like if I'd noticed any objects out of place or anything strange in the previous days. Honestly, I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but thinking back, a few small details started to make sense. Little things, like a glass out of place in the kitchen or that strange feeling that someone was watching me, which I'd always ignored, thinking it was just in my head. Everything made more sense now, and I felt a mix of fear and disgust just thinking that I'd been sharing my house with someone without even knowing. The officers told me that, unfortunately, they couldn't find any recent traces of whoever it was. Apparently, this person had slipped out as soon as they realized I'd called the police. They said they'd keep searching in the area, but for now, I was safe. Even with that reassurance, I couldn't feel at ease. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, every little sound making my heart race. My parents came home the next day, and when I told them what happened, I saw the shock and worry on their faces. From that day on, the house never felt the same to me. To this day, I remember that experience like it happened yesterday. We never found out who the person was, where they came from, or how long they'd been hiding there. After that weekend, my parents reinforced all the doors and windows and even installed security cameras. But the feeling of invasion stayed with me. Every time I'm alone at home now, I still get that shiver down my spine, like someone's watching me. Even though the police assured me I was safe, that experience left a mark that's never really faded. Now, whenever I hear a strange noise, my mind goes right back to that night and the slow sound of the door closing upstairs. If I learned anything from this, never underestimate the silence of an empty house. I've never been the type to get scared easily, especially in public places like a grocery store. I was used to shopping late at night since it was the only time I had free after a full day at work. Back then, I worked as an office assistant, and by the time I was out, all I wanted was some peace and quiet to get what I needed and head home. The 24-hour grocery store in my town was always quiet at night, with empty aisles and only a few staff around. It was the perfect setting to unwind a little. But that night, something strange gave me an unsettling feeling that I couldn't ignore. I was grabbing a few common items, not paying much attention, until I noticed a man standing in the opposite aisle, staring straight at the shelf, yet it felt like he was watching me out of the corner of his eye. It was like he was pretending to be a shopper, handling products with this awkward stance as if he didn't know what he was doing. I thought I was just being paranoid and kept walking, but every time I changed aisles, there he was again, just a few feet away. He was pretending to look at the products, but he didn't touch anything. That's when I realized that no matter which aisle I entered, he always appeared there, as if playing some kind of strange game. I tried to convince myself that he was just there by coincidence, but each aisle I entered, he would show up right behind, always keeping that minimal distance, as if trying not to attract much attention. My heart began to race in a way I couldn't control. I grabbed a bag of cookies and pretended to be distracted, trying to observe his movements out of the corner of my eye. He was looking at the shelf, but I could tell his eyes were slightly angled toward me. That blank, almost robotic expression sent a chill down my spine. It was way too late for someone to be wandering aimlessly. Anyone there at that hour was usually in a hurry to finish their shopping, but he seemed to be there just to watch me. I decided it was best not to take any chances. I tossed a few things into my cart just to keep up appearances, pretending everything was normal, while every instinct I had screamed for me to leave. I went over to the self-checkout, and as I scanned my items, I looked discreetly over my shoulder. He was standing near the exit, almost like he was waiting for me, but trying to look casual, staring at a display board on the wall. My hands were shaking as I scanned the items and completed the purchase. I didn't know what he wanted, but the idea of going out to the parking lot alone and finding him there was terrifying. As soon as I was done, I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself, and prepared for whatever might happen. When I stepped out of the store, the cold night air wrapped around me, intensifying the tension in my body. The parking lot was practically empty, just a few scattered cars, and mine was parked a little further away in one of the last spots. I quickly looked around, and there he was, standing by a pillar near the exit, staring at me with that eerie, unwavering look. He wasn't even trying to hide it this time. It was as if he no longer cared if I knew he was following me. That's when I felt my stomach twist. Part of me just wanted to sprint to the car and get out of there as fast as I could, but I knew I had to keep calm. With steady steps, but without running, I headed toward my car, trying to look as composed as possible. With each step, I felt his gaze burning into my back. That's when I realized something even more disturbing. He started following me again, this time with no disguise. The sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot made my heart race, but I forced myself not to look back. I was only a few feet from my car, and I knew I had to act quickly. As I got closer, I reached into my bag for the key with trembling hands, praying he'd give up and leave, but he just kept getting closer. When I finally got my key out, panic fully took over. I put the key in the lock and unlocked the car, almost tripping as I opened the driver's side door. At that moment, I glanced back and saw that he had stopped just a few feet from me, with a blank expression, almost as if he was waiting for some kind of reaction. There was something in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and hunger. I don't know, but it was enough to make me jump inside the car and lock all the doors immediately. I stuck the key in the ignition in a hurry, my heart pounding so hard I could hear each beat. The engine took what felt like forever to start, but as soon as it did, I didn't think twice. I reversed and sped out, almost hitting a column. I took one last look in the rearview mirror and saw him standing in the same spot, watching me as I drove away. He didn't try to chase the car, didn't make a single move. He just stood there, watching, like he knew something I didn't. As soon as I hit the road, I took a deep breath, but the feeling of relief didn't last. Out of reflex, I looked in the rearview mirror again, still scared, and that's when I saw a shadow, almost as if he was there, in the darkness of the back seat, even though I knew that was impossible. My heart nearly stopped. I jumped in my seat and turned to look at the back, just to be sure he wasn't actually there. Of course there was no one, but the fear was so deep in me that for a second I believed he could have somehow gotten into the car without me noticing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but the feeling of still being watched was overwhelming. At that moment, all I wanted was to get home as fast as possible and put it all behind me. I sped down the empty road, avoiding looking at the sides, while my mind raced with thoughts about what he might have done if I hadn't managed to escape. Getting home, however, didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. When I parked in my driveway and turned off the car, I realized my hands were still shaking. I took a few deep breaths, but it felt like the sense of danger had seeped into every fiber of my body. I looked around before getting out of the car, half expecting to see him lurking in some dark corner of the street, but everything was empty. Only then did I step out and rush inside, locking the door behind me. Even in my own home, I felt exposed, like he could be watching me from some hidden place I couldn't see. That night, I left all the lights on and slept with my phone by my side, every little sound making me jump out of bed. After that night, I thought the feeling of being watched would eventually fade, but in the days that followed, the discomfort only grew. Every time I left the house, it felt like someone was watching, and even at work, I found myself glancing over my shoulder. I told a few people about what happened, but they all said I was probably just being paranoid, that I was probably just too tired and got spooked over nothing. But deep down, I knew it had been real. So one night I decided to go back to the store, just to make sure it was nothing but a nightmare in my mind. And that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw the same man from that night, standing by the store entrance, exactly where I first saw him. He didn't move, didn't look at me, but he was there, like a shadow that refused to leave. I didn't need any more confirmation that it wasn't a coincidence. I turned back to my car without even stepping foot inside the store, and since then, I've completely changed my routine. I started shopping at different times, at other places, avoiding any situation where I might be alone. To this day, I don't know what he wanted or why he followed me, but the memory of that blank expression and that cold stare haunts me to this day. Whoever or whatever he was, I hope I never cross paths with him again.